As the fountains in the Seraglio whispered their soothing song, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent sat in quiet contemplation, his thoughts drifting back to the days of his youth, the days of conquest and triumphs, of love and tragedy. Once, he had been filled with unshakable confidence, believing that every decision he made was just, every action righteous. And yet, as an old man, many of those same choices now seemed to taste of ash. He remembered his campaign in Belgrade, a victory that had solidified his power and marked the beginning of his legacy. But his return home was met with devastation. His infant son and his eldest had both perished. The weight of their loss crushed him, leaving him with only Mustafa. He mourned them, he raged against fate. But in the very same year, a new life was brought into the world. His favorite concubine, Roxolana, the fire-haired woman who had captured his heart unlike any other, bore him another son. She was different from the others, this Polish slave who had entered his court. He had loved women before, but not like this. Roxolana stirred something deeper within him, an all-consuming passion. He had loved her so much that he eventually broke with tradition, making her his queen, an act unheard of for an Ottoman sultan. His heart had been full, his empire flourishing, and at his side stood not only his beloved Roxolana, but also his most trusted friend, Ibrahim Pasha. Ibrahim had been his companion since youth, his most faithful confidant. When the time came, Suleiman had elevated him through the ranks until, after the conquest of Rhodes, he named him Grand Vizier. Ibrahim had protested, fearful that such power would invite danger, but Suleiman had dismissed his concerns with a laugh. "As long as I reign, no harm shall come to you," he had assured his friend. How could a decision made out of such love be wrong? For a time, it seemed as though nothing could shake their happiness. Ibrahim had even married Suleiman's sister, and the wedding had been a spectacle unlike anything the empire had seen since the grandest days of Rome. Though in his youth he had known little of family, he had built one now, both in blood and in bonds of loyalty. But peace and power breed envy, and ambition never sleeps. Ahmed Pasha, the second vizier, had expected to be named Grand Vizier after Rhodes. He had worked tirelessly to undermine his predecessor, only to find himself passed over for a man he considered his equal. Knowing he would never attain the position he desired, Ahmed requested the governorship of Egypt instead, and Suleiman, seeing no harm in granting this, approved his request. Egypt, still a recent addition to the empire, was a land rife with intrigue and rebellion, and Ahmed knew it well. From his new seat of power, he carefully laid his plans, seeking allies among both the Muslims and Christians who chafed under Ottoman rule. When the time was right, he struck. One night, he ordered the slaughter of all local janissaries and declared himself Sultan of Egypt. The rebellion was crushed, but it was only the beginning of unrest. More uprisings followed, and Suleiman knew there was only one man he could trust to restore order, Ibrahim. His friend did not fail him. With a combination of military genius and administrative foresight, he not only quelled the rebellions, but also restructured the governance of Egypt and Syria, ensuring that no future governor could amass enough power to challenge the Sultan again. From that day forward, Suleiman relied on Ibrahim more than ever, for even a ruler as great as he could not oversee such a vast empire alone. While his friend governed, Suleiman set his sights on another great campaign. He wanted the world to believe he was preparing to march south against the Shia Persians, but his true target lay to the north. Hungary. The European powers were more divided than ever, embroiled in their own conflicts against the Habsburgs. Hungary would stand alone. With an army of 100,000 men, Suleiman set forth, Ibrahim at his side. The campaign began well, but nature proved a formidable enemy. Torrential rains flooded rivers, turned roads into swamps, and delayed the transport of heavy cannons. Still, their discipline held. As they advanced, Ibrahim was sent ahead with a contingent to seize the fortress of Petrovaradin. Within days, he returned victorious, bearing spoils and the heads of 500 defenders. He had lost only 25 men. Finally, The army reached the Danube, burning their bridges behind them to steel themselves against retreat. The march through the bogs was grueling. Men and horses sank into the mire, some never emerging. But at last, they reached the fabled Mohacs plain. There, before them, stood the forces of Hungary, led by the young King Louis II. The enemy was pitifully outnumbered. 25,000 men against the Sultan's 100,000. Worse, the Hungarian nobles, arrogant and impatient, had forced their king into battle before reinforcements could arrive. They had not even fortified their position, choosing instead to rely on the raw power of their armored knights. As the battle lines were drawn, Ibrahim rode through the ranks, speaking words of encouragement, promising wealth, honor, and eternal glory. The Hungarians, disorganized and desperate, launched their charge. Thousands of armored knights thundered across the plain, their steel flashing in the dying light, their battle cries echoing. But Suleiman's janissaries stood firm, their muskets unleashing deadly volleys. Knights fell by the hundreds, yet the charge did not falter. Soon, the enemy was upon them. The fighting was brutal. Amidst the chaos, some Hungarian knights managed to break through to the Sultan's position. His horse reared, his saber struck, and his personal guard clashed in a desperate struggle. But the sheer discipline and numbers of the Ottoman army could not be overcome. Slowly, inevitably, the Hungarians were surrounded and slaughtered. Only a handful escaped. Ibrahim rode up to him, covered in the blood and dust of battle. Historians would later say his lance struck like the talon of a hawk, his sword like the claw of a lion. They embraced, the joy of victory swelling between them. Yet as the celebrations began, a messenger arrived. The body of the Hungarian king had been found. Suleiman rode out to see it. Louis II, barely more than a boy, lay lifeless on the field. The Sultan looked down upon him with a strange sorrow. He had wanted Hungary, had needed it for his empire's future, but he had not wished for this young king to die. Still, it was a victory for the empire, a triumph for Islam. Ibrahim had proven himself yet again. There were greater days ahead, greater battles to win, greater legacies to forge. They would return to Istanbul not just as conquerors, but as architects of a world reshaped by their hands. And so, the Sultan turned away from the body of his fallen enemy, his thoughts already on the future, on the empire he would continue to build, on the love he had for his queen, and on the friend he trusted above all others. For now, at least, the world belonged to him.